Bill Carson was never a rich man. He had lived his entire life in a small town in Virginia, working as an auto mechanic. His wife, Mary, was a housewife, and their 2 children, Tom and Sarah, were long grown and living their own lives. One morning, Bill received a letter. The envelope was thick and official-looking. The sender a New York law firm. "What is this?" Mary asked as Bill opened the letter. The text was difficult to read because of the small print, but one sentence immediately caught his attention. "We are pleased to inform you that you have received an inheritance of $1 million from George Clark." Ah, Bill could not believe his eyes. George Clark was his childhood friend, but they had not seen each other for over 30 years. What prompted George to leave him so much money? $1 million? Ah, Mary exclaimed, peering over Bill's shoulder. "That's incredible!" The news spread quickly through the family. Tom, the eldest son, was the first to call. "Dad, that's fantastic! We can invest this money, start a family business." Sarah, the youngest daughter, had a different idea. "Now you and Mom can buy a new house closer to me. You deserve it." Bill could feel the money starting to change his children's attitudes. The news of the inheritance changed the atmosphere in the Carsons' house. Bill had never seen his family so excited. Even their dog, Charlie, seemed more energetic, as if he sensed their joy. Everyone gathered in the dining room, discussing how to use the money. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity," Tom said, gesturing with his hands. Dad, you've always dreamed of opening a garage." "Now it's possible," Sarah interrupted her brother immediately. "Or they can buy a house in Florida and enjoy their retirement. Dad, you deserve it." Mary listened to the children, but she seemed to be thinking of her own. She looked at Bill tenderly. "Maybe you want to keep something for yourself. What do you think, darling?" Bill was silent, staring at the letter. Why his thoughts kept returning to George Clark? Why had he left him money they hadn't spoken for so long? Later that day, Bill decided to call his lawyer to clarify the details. "Mr. Carson, your friend George left you money without any conditions," said the voice on the other end of the line. "All he asked was that you keep his name in your memory?" "Is that all?" Bill asked. Yes, but to be honest, it's unusual. George didn't have any close relatives, but we know he was a pretty careful man. Maybe there's more to it than meets the eye." The conversation left Bill with a sense of unease. The next few days passed in euphoria. The Carson family discussed their future plans, but the first signs of disagreement began to appear. Tom insisted that the money should be invested and suggested several risky options. "Dad, I know a man who can double this money in a year." "It's a surefire opportunity." Sarah objected. "Dad, don't listen to him. He wants to take a risk with your money. You'd better save it or spend it on yourself." Mary tried to remain calm, but tensions in the family were rising. Bill realized that the money that was supposed to bring joy was starting to tear his family apart. One evening, Bill was sitting in his garage, where he used to fix up old cars. He was holding a photo of George. In the photo they were young, laughing, each holding a bottle of beer. "Why did you leave me this money, George?" What did you want me to do with it?" Suddenly he remembered the last conversation they had more than 30 years ago. George had said, "Bill, money can be a blessing or a curse. It all depends on how you handle it." It had been a few weeks since Bill had received his inheritance. Whenever the family gathered for dinner, the conversation inevitably turned to money. Friendly discussions gradually turned into discussions, and then into outright arguments. One morning Sarah came to Bill's house while he was working in his garden. "Dad, can I talk to you?" She asked, sitting down on the bench next to him. Bill wiped his hands on a towel and nodded. I know Tom wants to invest in the business. But you know what an adventurer he is. He's always after a quick buck, and then he loses everything. You can't let him control your finances. Bill thought for a moment, but before he could answer, Sarah continued. You should buy a new house for yourself and your mom. You don't want to take any risks. You should be thinking about peace in your old age. His daughter's words were sincere, but Bill sensed that she was also thinking about her own benefit. Later that day, Tom decided to talk to Bill too. His voice was confident, but a little cocky. Dad, you know I've always been an entrepreneur. I can use this money to grow my business and make our family rich. Everyone benefits from it. Bill sighed heavily. Tom, that's a lot of money. If you lose, it'll be a disaster. Tom waved his hand. You know me, I won't lose. Just trust me. Bill could see that his son also wanted control over his money. That night, Bill couldn't sleep for a long time. He felt that money had not brought him peace, but had only divided his family. Thinking of George, he asked himself again, why did you leave me this money? What should I do with it? The next day, something strange happened. Bill received a phone call from an unfamiliar number. On the other end was a man with a deep voice who introduced himself as George's former business partner. Mr. Carson, I've known George for many years. He was a difficult man. If you've received money from him, I advise you to be careful, the man said. What do you mean? Bill asked, wary. George always had his reasons. Believe me, his gifts were never free, the man said, and hung up. And several months passed, and the money, which at first seemed like a blessing, became the cause of ever-deepening disagreements in Bill's family. Where there had been comfort and understanding, distrust and tension now settled in. And one evening, Bill and Mary were sitting in the kitchen. She was silent, but her face reflected fatigue. What happened to our family, Bill? She asked quietly. We were always close, and now our children have become enemies. Bill shook his head, looking down. I don't know, Mary. I thought this money would give us a new start, not make us strangers. The arguments between Tom and Sarah became louder and louder. One day, when everyone gathered for dinner, the situation reached a boiling point. Dad, you have to finally decide who will manage the money, Tom insisted, thumping the table. Why should you decide? Sarah couldn't help herself. You always think only of yourself. You want everything for your business. And you always hide behind the mask of a caring daughter, but you also think about your own benefit. Tom snapped. Bill tried to calm them down, but Mary's voice drowned them all out. Enough. You don't even see that you are destroying our family with your quarrels. Everyone fell silent, but the tension remained in the air. That night, Bill had a strange dream. He saw George sitting in a dark room and silently looking at him. On the table in front of him was money, but it was covered in blood. George, why did you do this? Bill asked in his dream. George smiled, but his gaze was cold. Money is never easy, Bill. It always costs something. He replied and disappeared. Bill woke up in a cold sweat. The next day, Bill received another call from a stranger. The voice on the other end was calm, but it was cold. Mr. Carson, the man said, George's inheritance is not a gift. It's a test. He left you the money for a reason. Bill could take it no longer. What do you mean? Why does everyone speak in riddles? You'll find out the truth, but it may be too late. The man replied and hung up the phone. This call only heightened his anxiety. Bill realized that he had to get to the bottom of the truth, even if it meant revealing secrets he didn't want to know. The anxiety that had been with Bill since he received his inheritance finally forced him to act. He decided to go to New York to meet in person with the lawyer who handled George Clark's cases. The law firm was located in a tall, dark glass building that gleamed in the sunlight. A friendly secretary led Bill to the office of the lawyer, Mr. Wilson. "Mr. Carson." Wilson began, pushing his glasses up onto his forehead. "I'm glad you decided to come, but I have to warn you George's legacy may be more complicated than you think." Bill was wary. "More complicated? What do you mean?" Wilson pulled a thick folder of documents from the safe. "George left you this money, but with it a diary and some letters. He insisted that you read them only if there were problems. Maybe it's time." Bill took the diary and began to turn the pages. George's notes were chaotic, but one phrase recurred in almost every section. "Money is the greatest enemy of the human soul." While Bill was poring over the notes, Wilson continued. "I knew George for many years. He was a wealthy man, but money ruined his life. His wife left him because of the influence it had on his family. His children despised him for being cold and greedy. All he left was a huge fortune and a lot of regret." The lawyer's words struck Bill like a thunderbolt. He realized that George's story could become his own. When Bill returned home, he spent the night reading the diary. He learned that George had deliberately left him the money to see if anyone else could avoid repeating his mistakes. The final note read, "Bill, if you're reading this, remember I left you more than just money. I left you a choice. Can you keep what I've lost?" These words were a turning point for Bill. He decided to talk to his family and stop the conflict before it was too late. Bill Carson sat at the kitchen table, George's diary in his hands. His eyes were red from a sleepless night, his mind clouded with confusion. The revelation of the truth of George's inheritance made him vulnerable, but also gave him determination. He called the whole family together, and Mary, Tom, and Sarah were gathered in the living room. The tension was palpable. "Dad, why did you call us?" Sarah asked, looking at him suspiciously. Bill put the diary on the table. I want to tell you the real reason George left me this money," he said. Bill began by describing how George had lived and what had led to his loneliness. How he told George had lost his family because of his greed and his inability to put his loved ones above material possessions. "This money is not a gift. It is a test. And I'm afraid we've already started to fail it," he said. Mary sighed. "Bill, I felt it from the beginning. This money has only brought arguments." Tom disagreed. "Dad, you're exaggerating. We're just trying to figure out the best way to use it. What's the problem?" Sarah snapped. "The problem, Tom, is that you only think about yourself." The argument flared up again, but this time Bill didn't let it get out of hand. "Enough," he snapped. "We're all to blame. We've let money become more important than ourselves. But it doesn't have to be this way." After this conversation, Bill proposed a radical solution. "I want to give this money to charity," he said. It's the only way to keep our family together." These words caused a shock. Tom stood up. "You can't do this, Dad. It's not fair." Sarah also looked confused, but she was silent. Mary put her hand on Bill's shoulder. "If this is your choice, Bill, I'll support you." The next few days were tense. Tom and Sarah kept their distance, not agreeing with their father's decision. But Bill felt that this was the only right way. He gave the money to create a foundation to help local children and felt that he could finally breathe peacefully. Bill crouched in his garage, listening to the silence. On the shelf next to him lies George's diary. His eyes look sadly out the window, behind which the sun is slowly setting below the horizon. He knows that his decision was the right one, But can he regain his family's trust? His question remains unanswered.